Hello and welcome. I'm Kate Conklin.
And I'm Jennie Morton.
And we are here having what we are calling Dynami-Logues. So Jennie came up with this. Tell us, Jennie, about where this came from, this idea.
Well, I was just kind of musing on, dialogue. And I was thinking, conversations. I thought it kind of sounds against. Proversations, prologues, so this was kind of where this is kind of how my mind works. And then I thought, dialogue just sounds like, very binary, very kind of flat. And so I thought it's about a dynamic, whenever the two of us get together, things get a little dynamic. So I thought Dynami-Logues. I was just on a walk and it came to me. So I sent that to you and you went, I like that.
I love it. I love it because when I think of you and when I think of us, I am always thinking of this omnidimensional, transdisciplinary cross-pollination that we have each, ourselves. And then when we get together, it just lights up the entire universe in my experience. And so what we're doing here today is really just the first conversation, inviting people to be with us while we have these conversations about what's coming up in each of our work, in our work together. We share clients, you work with me, like we have all of the ways that we're together, and really inviting people into how we think, how we work, how we do things.
Yeah, and I've been deep in the last 2 years into sort of unified physics and the physics of consciousness and how that relates to our biology and stuff. And, one of the sort of fundamental laws of the universe is it's a feedback, feed forward system. And that, we're both practitioners. We can tend to end up working quite a lot in isolation. Obviously the people we are working with, but in terms of getting sort of practitioner feedback as well, it's just so important to kind of put things out there and have them reflected back and then go, oh, I never thought of it from that perspective before. And just the two of us are just so curious, like we're just like constantly learning and seeking. And so to be able to have that sort of interaction with someone who kind of is already at a certain level of understanding is just that's what I find just so juicy about it. And whenever I've done sessions with Kate, it's always just like there's no plan. She just shows up with this list of questions and I'm like, yes, let's just dive into that. And I just love that kind of improvisatory sort of flow to things, rather than we get so hooked up on, oh, it's a 6-step program to achieve this goal, and that kind of thing just doesn't resonate with me at all. So to be in this more improvisatory, what's coming up for you, or how can I flip that a different way, and it's enriching for both parties. And then working in that situation with a third party as well, or a group or something, is just increases the kind of bandwidth and the information density of an interaction. And that's what I enjoy.
Yes. And as you're touching on curiosity, what I always think about with you is the question of why. When I'm borrowing from, like, well, what would Jennie do? She'd ask why. Okay, but why is that happening? Okay, so we think it's this area or this issue, or and looking at the biotensegrity, the wholeness, what is the pattern that is either getting magnified through the system, or sort of going raveling and unraveling. It's interesting, raveling and unraveling both mean the same thing. So yeah, I'm not sure why we have 2 words, but that's okay. So I just think of like the following the story and that curiosity that you always have, and that there's a great level of confidence and openness of your system. And when I work with you as a client, what I feel is that anything and everything is available to us. It's not that, as you say, it's not that you're coming in with like, right, here's what we're going to do. And I'm also not coming that way in my work. And also when I am being a client, is I'm coming with what's alive for me now, or I'm asking what's alive. And so there is this catalytic collaboration that's always happening. And every time I leave a conversation or a session with you, I have things that I wasn't even wondering about, that now I'm going, oh, well, that's at play. Oh. And then that information, as you say, that feedback and feed forward, that information goes through my system in a way that I get even more questions and even more information about what's possible. And so that is how I prefer to learn. It's how I've always preferred to learn, is to go to someone who is just, you know, open and connected and say, here's what I'm interested in right now, because I now trust, and I very much trust this for my clients as well. And I know that you work this way as well. Whatever's coming up for us is the right thread to pull, because it's all connected anyway. So if it's important, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of switching. You know, we have a tendency to give our intellectual, logical brain primacy in a situation. I want to know this, and I think that this is happening. It's like, you know, people who come to me and they say, I have this such and such a syndrome. Yeah. And it's like, are you sure? You know, our thought processes can often become self-fulfilling prophecies and lock us into a certain way of thinking. Well, I'm coming to you with this, and therefore I'm expecting we're going to do A, B, and C to sort that out. Yeah. Whereas what really happens in the biology is the body is speaking, and it's not always telling the same story as what our intellectual brain, the stories we are telling ourselves. So what I'm typically doing in a session is I listen to the body. I kind of see myself as in the role of interpreter in a sense. You know, somebody's coming in with this whole story about what they think's going on. Oh, well, everybody in my family got back pain after the age of 40. It's like, okay, that's a story you've been told, and your biology might just end up following that. But is that the truth? And so when you start getting into the body and you find actually there's a whole different story playing out here, and then I sort of act as an interpreter to offer different perspectives on what's going on. Because if we're, you know, the way the nervous system works, you know, when we do things repeatedly, and that might be physically, or it might be mental loops that we get in stories we tell ourselves, the more charge and electrical current you run down those pathways in the nervous system, the deep. It's a bit like driving down an earth track, and you know, the more you drive down it,
bring it in,
and then you're kind of suddenly like you can't even see out. You're like, well, this is the whole world, this is the universe. And it's like, well, actually, if you come up here, there are all these other options of different paths you could take. Now suddenly you're stuck, and it's going to take a conscious effort to come out of that rut and choose a different path. Whereas I kind of maintain the 36,000 foot view, and I can see all the paths, I can see all the options. So I'm like, there's a whole other way we could be approaching this. Do you want to come out of your rut and find that? And then empowering people with tools and skills of how to adjust those thought patterns, which the biology will follow the story. So, you know, I always say, if we don't like where this story is taking us, write a better story. Yeah. So I kind of have, that's with my work in the last sort of year or so, I've just really sort of encapsulated it in that way. You know, I was just doing what I did, and I didn't really sort of think about exactly what it is I'm doing, but, you know, to boil it down to something, it's just offering different stories and helping people rewrite the script. So that we don't just live out these self-fulfilling prophecies all the time. Yeah. That gives us, because otherwise we just feel like we're a victim of our genetics or our this or our that or what's going on in the world. We're not. We are the creators. We are in the driving seat. And when you get that, it's like anything's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I find so exciting about the way that our work complements each other, and specifically the way that I've worked with you, or rather you've worked with me. I've worked all of the things, right? That there are stories that get transmitted to me once we have interfaced with the physical manifestation. I mean, this is what's so interesting, is like, it can seem a little abstract, I think, to people, of like, oh, well, just tell yourself a better story. And it's like, what I think is so elegant about the way that we both work is that it's very bio-individual, biopsychosocially individual, that we're working very specifically with this person, their ideas, their nervous system, their body. And I know that you have this when you work with performers, as I do. A really example that came to me when you were describing this is when a singer is describing, here's what's happening in my singing. And then, and we could spend a half an hour with them describing, here's what's going on. And then when we say, okay, let's sing and let me see what's happening. And I see 12 steps back in the process, like, oh, this is only happening because of something way back here. That's not even, we don't even need to deal with that, because that's only a consequence of something way more fundamental. Once we clean that up, you're never going to have that problem again. But as you say, it's like the way that we categorize things and the way that we understand things. And a lot of it, of course, is just we're trying to communicate it to somebody else. And so we're doing the best job we can. So when we say that we're kind of getting into what's the story, what's the narrative, and sometimes what's the subconscious narrative, because it's often not conscious. Some of the things that have come to me have been things that I had no idea were either there or still there. And, it's like, well, your left hamstring, is being really clear about this. And then it's like that information pathway gets freed up from a physical standpoint, what we would consider the physical standpoint. And then suddenly it's like this whole download of information. And so it's not to minimize what the specific individual's experience. It actually is it's all about the specific individual's experience, how they've interpreted things, how it's played out in their system, and working very precisely with that. And as you say, giving more options, because I know for me, some of the biggest transformations that I've had, and they've been quite large, quite large transformations, have been, and I've said to you, like, wait, that's possible? It's like, I wasn't imagining it, not necessarily because I have no imagination. I honestly didn't know that was an option.
Right.
Yeah. And now that I know it's an option, absolutely.
Yeah. It's again about being at that 36,000 feet and seeing all the options, rather than being down at ground level where you can't see high, up high, your perspective's too low to be able to see the options. So you think, well, I've only got A, B, or C. Well, actually, no, you've got A through Z. Yeah. So, and again, it just takes, it's another sort of concept from kind of unified physics, is that we are all expressions of one consciousness viewing itself from many perspectives. Mm-hmm. Therefore, all perspectives are valid, but we're not going to see them all from where we're at. So we need that interaction with others to triangulate and actually show us the options that are available, and just kind of freeing ourselves of limitation in that sense, because that's another thing that tends to hold people back, is just limited thinking. Like you were saying, I didn't even know that was possible, or that connected with that. But there's some kind of, when I'm working with people, it's not like I'm telling people something and they're like, oh, this is new information. It kind of is intellectually new information, but there's also an in the body.
Yes.
Of truth. I don't feel it's not like something I am giving, it's
Right.
reminding the body of
Yeah.
reminding, and the truth is when the body just goes, oh yeah, that's truth. I might not
Yes.
intellectually, but the body knows.
Yeah. And I always feel like that's one of the things I tell my clients is like, sometimes the truth is not like, you're not happy about it, but it will be regulating for your nervous system.
Yes.
Like that drop in or that relief of like, oh, that's it.
Yes.
It's like when you're having a really tough time, you know, you might be having emotions that you don't prefer, but you share it with someone, they go, God, that reminds me of this. And you go, yes. That didn't change the situation necessarily immediately, but it's that recognition of what is that is so deeply regulating. And that, I think that's, for each of us, a really important piece of how we work with people is that we both have performance training. You have a long background of professional dance, professional singing, acting. Tell me what else I'm missing.
No, the content covers it.
Yeah. And so, and for me, you know, mainly singing with some other stuff mixed in, having that experience, it gives us this real boots on the ground lived empathy, so that we're not sort of looking at you going, oh, well, that's what your problem is. It's not in any way reductive or minimizing. It's very much like, yeah, that's what this is like. Let's get into it and let's make it easier for your system. Let's give you ways to work with this so that it's not effortful, so that it's not hard, especially when the design of it is to be easy and smooth.
Yeah. And it's, you know, for me, it's the same as, you know, because I teach dance, you know, I teach various, I performance coach. And I'm always looking for what is the most efficient way to do this? How little effort do we actually have to use to get maximum output? So performance optimization.
Yeah.
That's really the sort of concept underneath pretty much everything I do. And when, you know, when you were talking there about, you know, symptoms and when you get that moment of, oh, that's the truth. And the body's only pushing at you and creating symptoms when you're off course. You know, it's like, no, you're not getting it. You're not. So the moment there's just that recognition, you get that, and as you talk about that regulation, all we're looking for is auto-regulation. You know, we are born as this kind of ball of truth, right? That has no belief systems, no rules, regulations. And we begin our ability to auto-regulate is a feed forward mechanism with those around us at that time, so primary caregivers. So that's going to shape a lot of it. So we come in as this beautiful kind of blank slate of truth. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, well, my mother's a little anxious, so I'm going to learn that I have to be on my guard all the time. And then I go to school and I'm told this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. Judgment labels come on, shame, blame is layered. So we sort of end up in all these layers and all the stories we've been told. But the body is always trying to auto-regulate back to that truth. And when you're off it, it's going to be yelling at you in some way, shape, or form. So until we find our way back to the truth, and the truth is not an intellectual concept, it is a physical expression.
Yes.
When you learn to use that as your arbiter. So one of the things, you know, I'm working with people that's I think one of the big key tools that they develop is the ability to stop using logic to get to truth. You know, I mean, I think what's going on in the world right now will tell you facts are not truth, right? Truth is that the body will auto-regulate and go back to neutral and homeostasis when it goes, now you've heard me, we're in truth. As soon as you go off it, it'll punish you, and we come back to truth. And it's not to say we don't have to compromise our truths sometimes in the world to get something done, but it's about whether you're aware that you're
but do you have that clarity Exactly, because I think what is so deeply dysregulating for a lot of us is that we lose track of what's true for us, and we're not necessarily trusting our own experience.
Yes.
We've learned, to put someone else's experience as correct.
Yes.
Right. And that, again, from being an infant, that's not wrong. That's just what you make those adaptations to survive, to be safe.
Exactly.
And then as you talk about, going from co-regulation with a caregiver, going on to auto-regulation, there's a lot of, and we've talked about this recently with some shared clients we have, that there's some skill involved. You may not have all the tools you need, but they're learnable. And that your, body, for lack of, that's kind of a gross term, but like this system does recognize ease and truth. And when we're talking about coaching performers, I'm quite interested in making it very well known that when you experience ease, that's when you're being successful, and vice versa. Yes. That the idea that working hard or being effortful or being hard on yourself is what will lead to success. It's really it's the reverse of that. And it's really learning that process.
Yeah, and that's something we're very much programmed with in arts training. Typically, it's this kind of whiplash. If you're not bleeding, sweating, and passing out, you're not working hard enough, and you'll never achieve anything. That's the kind of model we've been entrained with. So we end up, as most performers, having these perfectionist tendencies where we don't need anyone outside us to beat us up. We'll do it very.
That's right.
To ourselves. But again, that's a story we've been told, and it's kind of this, again, just pulling it back to the physics, because I like to sort of, again, look at what's really underneath all of it. That effort, that kind of pushing, striving, that's an explosive force, which is actually, it's very masculine energy, and actually comes from a sort of patriarchal model where, that's how we generate energy on this planet, right? We have to burn things, combust.
Yeah.
We use way more energy in the process of combustion than we get out the other end. So it's actually a very self-depleting model when then we start to look at scarcity of resources and things because of the way we're getting energy. That's not how the universe works with energy. Right. It's an over unity system, which you get more out than you put in, and it's actually an implosive system, not an explosive system. So tapping into this is something I'm working on personally at the moment, is tapping into the implosive energy model in my body, which comes from cavitation, is where the energy comes from, and it always produces more than it takes to produce it. So even if I'm like, I live on the side of a mountain, so I've got a lot of inclines to walk on, and I would always be like, right, gotta get up this hill, explosive energy. So actually coming into, can I find that implosive model? And it's just, it does this to your head to do it, because the head's programmed that effort requires this explosive energy.
Yeah, and it's like the hallmark becomes the whole thing. Well, if I'm working hard, that means I'm being successful. And so the obstacle becomes the goal. Work hard, regardless of whether you're getting the result you want, because that's what you think the lever to press is.
Yeah. And we also, this comes down to this, slightly, and I would classify a lot of arts training as abusive, certainly mine was as ballet dancer, it's very sort of fear-based training. We actually skew our reward systems in the body. So we have these sort of neurochemical systems that are supposed to reward us for safety and punish us for dangerous situations. But we get very skewed. And what happens when you've been around a lot of that sort of thinking, this sort of, fear-based approach to things, that we skew our reward system between safety and familiarity, and those are different.
100%. This is
smudged. So people, just in a sort of gross example of, say, you've got an abusive parent or something, but the parent is supposed to keep you safe. So your body system likes to reward you chemically for proximity to parent, because that's your survival mechanism. But then if that person is also scaring you, right, creating fear, so then you're getting a sympathetic fight or flight response in that, you then kind of get this muddled,
get a tangle
where you actually get rewarded for the punishment.
Yeah, and there's an association there. I call it an associative pattern, right? Of like, if safety and fight or flight are tangled,
yeah,
then you're sort of you're never fully at ease, but you're always going back to, again, what's familiar. And it's not wrong. It's just, it's not a clean loop, right? So when you were talking about, we don't need to look to the outside for criticism because we do that for ourselves. What came to mind is exactly this, that when I was training, I knew the people, the coaches, the teachers who, if I could guess what they would see wrong with me and say it before they did, I could stay in their good graces, because then at least I knew I was wrong and they agreed with the way in which I was wrong. And there was a point at which I remember doing this so dispassionately. It was just like, I can play these people like a fiddle, because I know what you're looking for and I know how to give it to you. And then maybe I can actually learn something once we've gotten that out of the way. And then of course, you know, at some point I just went, right, I'm not interested in this anymore. I can learn from well-regulated people. I will find them, it'll be fine. Yes. But it is, I think that's an important moment to point out, because I think that there is a lot of that. It's almost like you got to sacrifice something to get value, to get what you need. You have to sacrifice in a lot of these non-relational situations in arts training. And it is, yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, it's something that I think resonates with a lot of people, that that familiarity, and as you say, that reward system of, ooh, it's good if I take a chunk out of myself and kind of go, see, I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we pat ourselves on our back for beating ourselves up. You know, it's kind of very it's, again, that's a one way, it's an approach, but there are easier ways.
Others.
I'd rather have something that's more efficient and less abusive to
yeah.
then that is available. But if you are used to running that rut, you're actually only getting a reward kick from punishing behavior. You know, it's an exhausting, you know, from my perspective, I'm always looking at, you know, energy consumption in the body and
completely,
parts, you know, and if you're exhausting that system all the time, again, it's not over unity, right? It's using more energy than what you're getting out the other end, and it's quite destructive. You know, in the body, that will become an inflammatory response, which is destructive, corrosive to body organs, to body vessels, and is also depleting the sort of adrenal system, and so adrenal fatigue could be a result. So you're looking at biological costs to running that model might not show up right now, but might show up in 5-10 years time, or if you're a lot younger, 20-30 years time. You're actually writing the story of your future health outcomes with that sort of behavior. So again, it's not something you're necessarily getting instant feedback for. You're like, well, I'm fine, you know.
Well, right, because you can, there is a loading that can, like, you have more window potentially when you're younger and just haven't had as much loading. And then there is a point at which you sort of see what the fruits are. You know, this is what I talk about when I talk about working with, right, extraordinary performers, which we both do, that, you know, if you're just kind of doing, just paddling around the bay sort of things, this may not really be a problem, whatever the thing is. But when you start to make it faster or higher, or, you know, for a longer period of time, longer duration, that's when you're going to start to see what doesn't scale. Yes. And when you're talking about this sort of biological burn, right, of like that explosive, that's part of the thing where, you know, I I was just talking about this with a group today where I was like, look, if you absolutely don't imagine yourself to be pro self-love and self-care, that's okay. Just know that you're burning an inefficient fuel. Yeah. And that this is an efficient fuel. So if you care about what you care about, you also have to care about this, because that's what gets you there. Yes. And so in that sense, you can just look at it as, well, what actually works? You know, what is actually effective? And that's the efficiency thing. It's like, I'm not just interested in efficiency because it's nice, although it is autotelic and self-set, you know, it's lovely, but it's because I want what I want.
Yeah. And
I want what I want, as you say, sort of in the easiest way possible, because I know now that effortful, it's hard, that's like a religion, or it's like a belief system, and it keeps us safe because it keeps us attuned to those who believe that and reward us for it. And as you say, our own reward system gets, you know, accustomed to that. But as you also say, you really can rewrite the story.
Yeah,
and the extent to which you can rewrite the story is absolutely, for me, shocking, illuminating, radical, because I've had physical things change that I have been told by people who know the things, that has one way it can go and it can get worse.
Yeah.
And I've had all of those things at this point, literally 100% of them reverse and get better than they've ever been.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why I think it's important. One of the reasons I think it's important for us to have these conversations, you know, in a way that other people can be a part of them, is like, no, trust me, things that you just don't think are possible, you just start seeing, like, wait, you did what? That can happen? And it really is. Then you get to make a choice, right? Do I want to kind of stay with what's safe and what I know, or do I want to, you know, honor my biology and venture out into new territory with my creativity and with what I now am starting to understand could be possible, right?
Yeah, and that can be scary. You know, it's
incredibly
stepping off the cliff, not knowing if the path's going to appear beneath your feet. You know, so that's what holds a lot of people back. Yeah. And again, these beliefs, you know, one of the, you know, most common questions I've probably been asked my entire career in therapeutic sort of sense is, how long is it going to take? How long will it take to fix this? How long will it take? And to know the possibility, it exists now. Yes. If you could just remove the blocks to what's getting there. There's certain things that tissues take a certain amount.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Patterns underneath it can shift very quickly, so we don't, but if you don't give yourself permission to do that, or you have no concept that that's even possible, or you're telling yourself a story that that's ridiculous, miracles don't happen, you know, because we've put these things in the, you know, miracles are just things we haven't figured out yet. You know, I mean, how 100 years ago they think that talking on Zoom like this would be a miracle, like how could across but they're not there. How are you, you know?
We're just there doing a bit of witchcraft, you know.
That was a miracle. Now it's like, this is just what we do every day. We don't think about it. So, so taking away that limitation is incredibly powerful, and having to just go with faith. But when you start to listen to the body and the truth in the body and get a sense, and that can be very nebulous for people, and that can sometimes take a while to really drop into.
I think that's the thing that can take the longest, because if you're used to sublimating that, if you're used to prioritizing, you know, and as you say, sort of triangulating to what's around you, you just don't necessarily have the senses fully developed, but the information is always there.
Yeah.
So it's about tuning in. It's about attunement, sort of picking up the radio signals from the inside. And as you say, I think the logical mind, that's our conditioning going, well, surely not. That can't be it. You can't be saying that to me, you know, me or whatever. And it's like, you know, just keep listening, keep asking, keep being curious, because the stuff that you think that can't be it. A lot of times it's like, that's exactly it. And this can go really fast.
Yeah, once you've had that realization, that's where the exponential kind of,
Yes,
because it's already, you know, you've just got out of its way, you know, you're
yes.
just allowing for that truth to come in. And
as
yeah,
you say, it takes energy, right? I mean, as you say, we talked about this before, that that it takes energy to block that information. And that's what I think people don't understand, is like, you are expelling energy regardless.
yes,
So even though something might seem new and different to you, keeping that truth at bay or sublimated, or as we talk about, like having the photon shield up of like, okay, right, I'm not going to let that in. That is leeching power. It takes energy to maintain that. And so once we can come into cooperation with whatever the truth is and see what's there, it's just way easier. And this is why I say a lot of times we've really learned, if it's effortful, that means it's working.
yeah.
And this really is flipping that. And it is at a quantum level. I mean, I started my own, before I started seriously training to be a singer, you know, I got my hands on this Fritjof Capra quantum physics stuff. And so this is, I think, where you and I just have a whole other, you know, realm of connection, is like understanding that everything is present and it expresses when you go to precisely measure it.
Yeah.
Then you see how is it expressing, but until you ask, it's around, but it's not coming to you in a shape that you can necessarily interpret it.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, the universal laws are pretty simple. A lot of this, you know, as weird as that sounds, because it's complex to understand, but it is simple.
Yeah.
But we've layered all this, it's like this sort of mesh we've created over the top of all of that, with all these beliefs and stories that we, you know, and this is like thousands of years of stories we've been told and conditioned to,
yes,
that this is what being human is about, that are not honoring those universal laws and the way things actually work. So when we come at things from that perspective, it's like a one-stop shop for everything.
Yes, it gets very simple and very elegant, right?
Yeah. And what, you know, all the sort of beliefs and things that people have are the safety net, right? They think they're getting their safety from those. Mm-hmm. Well, I know this is a flag I've put in the sand. We have to learn that safety is about being comfortable with vulnerability, and that anything else is just a prop or a, you know, and could be removed at any time. So, you know, the body, coming back to that concept of auto-regulation, the body is in a constant state of adaptation. So if the temperature is hotter or a little cooler, we're auto-regulating, calibrating if our blood sugar gets too high, too low. So we're in this constant state of elastic adaptability. And when you are rigid emotionally, the biology will tend to follow that. So the more rigid you are in your thinking, I need this, this, and this, and then I'm safe, well, then your body can only sort of work within very narrow parameters. But when you come into this concept of comfort with vulnerability, I am always able to adapt. Therefore, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, and this comes down to the physical stuff. If I'm working with a dancer or a, you know, physical performer, and they're wanting to find, you know, how do I find balance? You know, balance is not about being on one spot and not moving.
Right.
That's rigidity.
That constant.
Trying to get it from that.
Yeah.
Stability is, you know, is a dynamic process. If somebody nudges me, could I autocorrect from
right.
that?
And again, that's the cooperation with the design that I'm always, you know, going on about, is because if you know the design of us is that we are always moving.
Yes, always.
Then anytime you think, right, hold still, you know that you're not in cooperation with your design. So something can appear efforted or appear still, But again, we're talking about relative, right? It's an appearance, not an actual functional truth.
Yeah,
And that's something that I think for all of our clients, that, as you say, that comfort with vulnerability, that I'm going to step off the edge, because at some point it becomes harder to not move forward. Again, we're designed to constantly branch out into new territory. And so there is I'm going to leave the safety of what's familiar because of the promise of what I want. Yes. And I think that we both, tacitly or overtly ask people to really reckon with, do you want what the typical strategies are, or do you want what actually works? And are you open to, as Gandhi said, I'm orienting to truth, not consistency.
Yeah.
So just because every singer or every voice teacher you've ever encountered has said X, are you open to what's going to work is something else? Is it about that you want to do the thing the way it's done, or is it about that you want what you want? And if you want what you want, we're going to have, as you say, that comfort with vulnerability. And when I say vulnerability, I mean, you can talk about this also. I don't mean like, I'm open to injury. It's not open season vulnerability. No. It's the, as you say, it's the play in the system. It's the resiliency. It's the elasticity. And knowing that that's how I'm designed, and that that's not what's wrong with me, that's what's right.
Yeah, and it's the trust of the physical again, that yeah. when you are in truth with the physical, it knows where safe and unsafe is. Yeah. So it's constantly adapting to be within those parameters. So there is safety in it, but it's going to feel to you like it's vulnerable. It's nebulous. It's not.
Yeah.
Hold on to, we're always looking for these things we can grasp at and go, well, this is real, right? Mm-hmm. When you get down to the quantum level, nothing's real, right? Fractal holographic universe, I don't go down that rabbit hole, but the whole concept of reality is something that's up for question, should we say. But when you have that anchor point within the physical,
yeah,
knowing I can just hang around these parameters, and that's my safe boundary. And then I often sort of use an image of sort of kind of auric fields around us, like you've got like a bullseye target. You've got your first ring, your second ring, your third ring, your fourth ring, and say, like, when you're interacting with people, if you're somebody who gets anxious around certain people, and if you're an empath and you have what I call the fuzzy boundaries, right? You're letting a lot of stuff. It's, one of the systems I've developed to manage that is, you start to assess people. You're always reading people, new people you're meeting. Am I safe with them? Am I not safe with them? And so somebody will come into a room and I'm like, okay, you're going to be on the fourth ring. You can come into two, come into one because you're my friend. You're at 6. And, so you learn to find this elasticity in the system to make sure that you're always in regulation and you're not getting triggered every 5 minutes, because a lot of artists as well, creative people, tend to be on the empathic side. That's what makes you good at, you have to be very sensitive to be artistic. Right, they go hand in hand. So learn, and that's beautiful when you're, hearing the absolute sweet fine tuning of an instrument or your voice, but it's not so useful when you're in a restaurant and there's a lot of noise around you.
Right, it can be quite a lot on your system. And I think what
ring the fence a bit.
I love that sort of idea of the auric, or the rings of the target, and I also think that trusting, it's interesting because I think there's a conditioning of be sensitive when you're being an artist, but then right in the real world, sort of gird your loins or whatever. And what I feel like is under what you're saying, or maybe at the surface of what you're saying, is listen to the whispers, even if your logical mind or your conditioning says that's a perfectly fine chap, there's nothing wrong with him, let him into the first ring. If you're getting not safe, you don't have to have a logical reason for that. That it really can be, and usually is, your senses are getting it in a way that you might not even know you have a sense for that.
Yeah.
Right. Most people think we have 5 senses. We have at least 21, probably far more than that. And so when you're getting information, I mean, this was a huge pivot for me in my coaching practice, was I couldn't always justify why something didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally just went, I've never been wrong about this. I'm going to let go of the need to explain it like I was explaining it to a courtroom of like, here's my proof.
Justifying it, not
if I don't need to justify and prove, I can just trust that I've never been wrong about this.
Yeah.
And that the more attuned you become to that, the clearer it is, and the less you sort of doubt. And I do think that is our conditioning, is to be like, to constantly override those signals.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're wrong. They're usually correct.
And so the languaging I tend to use around that, if you do need to explain or justify to someone else, is I'm just not in alignment with that. I'm just not resonating with that, and those words, when you start to use that vocabulary, words are very powerful. So when you're using that vocabulary, it actually helps you tap into that more. Am I resonating with this? Am I aligned with it? As an animal with my Furby on it right now, that's probably a sign this is, but I'm going, no, but it's the best thing for me, really, I've been told, and then your body's going, so are you in resonance with it, thinking, bringing it into music? Is it a consonant chord or a dissonant chord?
And what flavor of dissonant? Like in a complimentary, fun way, or in a
that's just
clashes,
right? So using the skills that you have for hearing, or for dancers, the movement in the body, it's like, if I suddenly lose my elasticity around someone or in a particular situation, or even when I'm thinking about something I'm going to be doing and the body kind of gets like, stiff, why am I feeling stiff? So I always call them, the body is giving you a lot of poker tells. A lot of the time that's a poker tell. Every time I think about that job I've signed up to do, I get a headache. That's a poker tell. So learning to read those signs and honoring them, the more the body feels listened to, the less it has to shout, and again, that's what I kind of feel my role is in this interpreter kind of role. Often when people have got like an area of the body that's been troubling them for a long time, and I kind of just standing and putting my attention there, or my intention there, it's just, I almost hear, I kind of anthropomorphize body parts and things, I almost hear them go, oh, thank you, you heard me. I've been yelling for weeks and she's not paying any notice at all, but you heard me.
Yes.
I'm just going, I hear you. I might not know what you're trying to say yet, but you're being heard. And even that, there's a cellular that goes on. So acknowledging those things. So if you are, suffering from pain and symptoms, just that's one little thing you can do that's so easy. I'm listening, tell me. I do it every day. I have a practice every day now. At the end of the day, I just kind of lie down and I check in with my team. I'm like, okay, guys, who am I not listening to? Who's yelling? Who am I squashing? Who did I override today? I'm sorry, and if I have, I'm sorry, just it's such fun, I probably, I'm borderline psychotic, but it's multiple personality disorder, because I'm literally, okay, mitochondria, how are we doing?
Yes, absolutely.
But that is a form of self-love that can become to with a sort of playful attitude that doesn't feel like, oh, I've got to sit and be in some Zen mode.
Right, again, that sort of efforting hard work self-care. It's like,
I got to empty my mind to hear these things. Like, no, just have a conversation, just open up the conversation, just and when you first start doing it, when you go, okay, body, what do you got to tell me? You'll be like, crickets, but like, the forum's open. I'm just going to hold the space open for you, and whoever, and then eventually they might be like, oh, so actually, yeah, I've got a thing. Can I speak? You know, but if
Yeah.
your body's not used to being listened to, it doesn't know to speak, right? So you've got to create that opportunity, create that space for that to happen. And as you practice that more and more, you'll be amazed at the things you hear. Like, oh my
I
gosh.
always am. I am just blown away. I've had the most amazing 2 weeks of just things coming through that I'm like, thank you for telling me. Thank you for telling me. I didn't know that, even though, and this is something that, you know, I talk about whole self-cognition, because I think that, you know, the language that we have, the English language, is limited in this way.
Very limited. Yeah.
Is very limited. And so even the way that we're talking about this, we're using words in very sort of broad strokes, right? So it's like when we say body, we don't mean like, here's your brain and here's your body. We're not talking about separateness. In fact, as you said, we're talking about sort of the entire field. Rather, yes. It's not me in a field.
You are the field.
We are the field.
The field. You're just a swirling convergence in the field. I always say it's like with fish in water. Do fish know they're in water? Yeah. Right? But it's not even just that. It's you know, if you're cruising through water, you're not aware of it. There's no resistance. But if you come up against like a whirlpool, for instance, suddenly, you know, even far out from you, starting to feel, oh, I'm starting to feel some resistance. You know, then it builds and builds and builds towards the event horizon. That's kind of what we are. We are a swirling confluence within the field, but we are the field as well, where people's brains melt. So this whole concept of matter, and you know, one of my favorite quotes from the sort of physics stuff I studied is particles, you know, because we think, oh, we're made up of all these particles, you know, but particles are a behavioral event. They're not a thing. They are a behavioral event. So we are just, and again, coming back to that idea of we're always in motion.
I was just going to say it's
vibration.
I talk a lot about animacy and the language of animacy, because in other languages, there are all these verbs that mean being, non-gendered being, you know, like a tree in English is an it. Yes. No, it's not. It's a being. I mean, it's alive, right? So it's what I always joke about is like, when we talk about animacy, it's like, well, on what level? Because you could say, you know, this table isn't animate, but it really depends on what you mean by, because to me it is, right? It is, nothing is solid matter the way it's just a pattern of probability and relationships. And that's, you know, bringing us back all the way around and up and down and in every direction of this behavioral, all possibilities are present at all times.
Yeah.
And as one of my coaches is fond of saying, the universe is always a yes to what you want.
Yes.
So if that's the case, what do I want? And I would also say, just as you, to sort of dovetail off of, you're saying, you know, when you listen to your body, you open up the forum, and a lot of times it's crickets. It's very much the same thing for, well, okay, if all things are possible, what do I want? A lot of times you'll get nothing.
Right.
And if you keep asking and keep asking and keep asking, eventually you'll get that momentum and that avalanche. But it's kind of like a muscle we haven't developed. It's a way of connecting fully that it's almost like it's just the wires are a little loose, and it's like we just kind of need to fully connect that. And I think you get all the, you know, in the phone lines, you get all the information like, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. But a lot of times it can be interpreted as a pressure. Well, what's my body telling me? And actually, this is something I wanted to pick up on, because I think we've had this, but both of us have had this respectively and collectively with shared clients, that sometimes what our bodies, quote unquote, are saying to us, we are saying, well, that's wrong. I want you to be like this, or I want you to do that. you should be doing this. And if our body's going, that hurts, and it's like, we can make ourselves wrong in ways that really delay and what's the word I want? Well, delay getting to the truth.
Right.
That's like, if you didn't know that your mind and the way you think reality is supposed to be, if you didn't know that, just what's being said, as opposed to like, well, my body's saying this, but that's not wrong because I want it to do this, or I want it to be that way. Your body's never wrong.
Yeah.
I've never had anyone, I've had them interpret it as that's not okay.
Yeah.
That can't be right. I want a different answer. But once you really get soft and listen, there's always a way forward. And this is what I mean by the success. Ease is a hallmark of success.
Yes, exactly. And
there's always a way. It's often not the hard way, though.
Yeah. And then you don't feel that you've earned, because then it comes into the whole self-esteem thing. Well, if I haven't, again, produced blood, sweat and tears to get there, I haven't earned it. I have no right to it. I don't deserve it.
Right. If it comes easily, then it doesn't count. And it's like,
doesn't count, or I cheated, or I, and I think, with what you were talking about with what do I want, the universe wants you to have what you want, but it's, again, the languaging around that has become very kind of skewed in a sense that, want has become this sort of acquisitional thing.
Yes.
I want something, and that actually comes from scarcity again.
Yes.
I have enough, so I want these things. So finding, desires, fulfillment of truth, which is really what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Finding, language around it that doesn't get you into that trap of I'm even sort of the idea of goal setting and things,
mm-hmm.
Still this kind of explosive model.
Well, absolutely, because really what's interesting is what happens to you on the way to the goal.
Right.
Rather than, it's like the goal, again, the goal to me is like measuring the electron. It's like, well, that gives us a precise coordinate, but I'm not going to strong arm myself or reality into I have to hit that coordinate at any cost. It's like, no, that just gives us a coordinate to move toward, and that journey of moving toward it is what I'm actually here for.
Yeah, and you're also opening up the field of possibilities that then sort of fractalizes out from that choice to move in this direction.
Yes. Yes.
So there isn't, so you might have thought, well, I want to do A, B, or C. So you start on that trajectory. And as you do that, the universe opens up all these other possibilities. You're like, yes. Oh, I never thought this was where I was going. But it's like my whole life, if you'd have asked me when I was 15 or something, what would you be doing at 51? What I'm doing right now I wouldn't have no clue, so I've always been like, follow the road signs, follow them. When you find like you're doing this in a certain situation, it's a signpost to go, maybe there's a way to go around this wall rather than trying to go through it, Right. So listening to the signposts and realizing that every choice you make fractalizes out a bunch of other potentials and possibilities. So we're living in a potential state of potentization, or whatever, I'm making up that word, but that potency of potential is
potentiation. Well, and as you talk about fractaling out, I think that's often what's happening when we experience miracles. Right. Nothing happened. I just, yes, I made one little step, or I made a decision. I mean, for me, this thing that's been we'll get into this at some point, but this thing that's been revolutionizing me for the last 2 weeks started with a decision. And then the flood of information and possibilities came in. And it really is that doing the next precise thing is what opens everything up. And so it feels, again, unearned, miraculous, all this. It's like all this stuff just flooded in out of nowhere. And it's like, well, that's the design. that's actually how it works when you make that decision or make a step. It's in the direction. It's not necessarily, and this is where I think we can turn the goal into a pressure, right?
Yeah.
Of like, I have to hit that, as opposed to, as you say, I'm going in that direction and I'm adaptable and available and responsive because I'm tuned into myself. I'm tuned into everything that's happening. So I don't get thrown off by surprises. I go, of course there are going to be surprises. I wonder what they'll be.
Yeah. And it comes back to that comfort with vulnerability again, it's just expect the unexpected. And again, I kind of look at words, people talk about paying attention to something. And, I always say attention often leads to tension. Let's go with intention, just intend towards something. It has motion. If I'm working with a musician and they're getting, some kind of overuse injury from playing, it's because their point of attention is at the point of contact with the instrument.
Yeah.
And that's creating tension. So when you intend, the sound doesn't happen at the point where your finger hits the string or the key or whatever. It's from before you and comes out beyond the instrument, so when you're in that mode of thinking,
conducting,
you're in the intention of it. That's that flow state that we're kind of describing with this ease and things that everyone's had little glimpses of that flow state at moments where you're just performing and you have no concept of how you're doing it, what you're doing. It's just happening with no conscious overlay on it. That's really the default state, right? That's how we as human beings should be existing. But we've layered all this other stuff on us, and maybe that was intentional because we've got to figure out how do we get back to that. It's not to blame it and go, oh, life did this, all these people created these rules and it's all everyone's out to get me kind of thing, which is a lot of the way people are thinking right now as well. Come back to that empowerment. No, well, it's just I was describing it recently to somebody in the context of I created a master's degree in London in performing arts medicine. I was part of the team that created that, and I wrote syllabus and you write exam papers and clinical exams. You write these clinical scenarios. A 42-year-old male with lower back pain presents, and you write out the whole story, and then the student has to figure out what are the differential diagnoses, what's the treatment plan, what's the self-care advice and all that kind of stuff. And I used to love writing these stories, creating all these, and they got to catch this little bit. And it's like, well, that's life.
Yes.
And, there are a lot of schools of thought that will say you wrote your own script for this. So somewhere you set this little, puzzle for yourself.
Yes.
And then that, for me, that kicks in. I use then my obsessive compulsive perfectionist tendencies to, a better outcome by going, right, well, I'm going to ninja this. So, right, what's the puzzle? I see what you were trying to say.
Yeah, and having that, all that engagement, that sense of play, that's, it's all that agency and creativity, and it's deeply regulating.
Exam for yourself. No one else did. So you don't get into blame model or victim model of the world's out to get me. It's like, no. And by that same token, you can write the next part, right? So you are the creator. We are creating all of this with our collective thought processes and things. So I'm always like, no, you're not going to trick me. And that's always been one of these, oh, no one's going to pull the wool over my eyes. So
it's interesting because something that came up in my memory when you were talking about sort of writing the case studies and the scenarios, that something very pivotal happened for me when I realized that my job as a coach is not to know what's going on, is not to be correct. It's to be open. And as you say, to listen to what's there. And that takes a good deal of auto-regulation, because I know that part of how this came up for me was realizing a lot of, especially in the voice field, but in lots of different fields, all of the fields, the fields within the field, that people were, if they didn't know, it would dysregulate them. And there's really only one thing to do, which is blame the student, right? It's like, if my job is to know and I don't know, I have basically two options. It's either I'm wrong or you're wrong. And, you know, and so for me, that freedom that came with like, oh, I don't need to know things I don't know. In fact, my job is to listen to what's happening. And that's why I think, you know, bringing it back to this whole self-empathy of like having, you know, having a performing life, having a long performing life, having a lot of experience coaching all different artists of all different kinds and all different humans of all different kinds. It really, for me, and I think for you, sort of frees you from that kind of one up, one down, better, worse, I'm the one who knows, or it's sort of like, look, we're just getting in here.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, like, we are interested in the truth. And even if we can't make sense of it immediately, we can trust that that's the right way to go and that more will be revealed. And there's something so, as I keep saying this word, but regulate is such a relief. I mean, you talk about, you know, putting your hand somewhere on someone and then that part seems to go, oh, thank you. I mean, I've literally said that to you probably a million times at this point, where it's like, I don't know what you're touching exactly, but that's where it's at.
Yeah.
And I literally didn't know that until you were there listening. I wouldn't have known to ask that I wasn't even on the map, right? And so that's what we can do for each other, is we can listen in a way that is beyond our own sort of well-worn pathways and perceptions.
Yeah, and not coming with preconceived ideas. Oh, well,
it must be this.
I've got this, this, and this, so that adds up to this syndrome, and so I'm going to do A, B, and C. You know, I used to train osteos and PTs and people, and you know, I would say it's one of the most dangerous things you can do is think you know, because then you're going to miss stuff. Because
you're not receiving information. It's a closed system then.
It's a closed system, and we're doing this, and then they're like, well, no, that didn't work and not getting better. Well, there must be something wrong with you then, because you didn't respond to the treatment. You know, it's like, no, you're not listening. So coming with that, that's why my approach when I'm working with people, whether it's online or in person, it's like, what's the body telling me? You know, tell me, just like I do with my own body at night. Tell me. I'm not going to tell you, you tell me. And then I get drawn to certain areas. I'm like, and they're like, well, I've got this lower back pain. I said, yeah, but this foot is
yes.
I'm just going to go and visit with the foot for a moment. Don't not crazy. There is a logic in here, and we're going to trace the story through, because the foot's got something to do with that back. You know, so often with the body, the site of symptom expression is exactly that. It's not causation,
right? You know, yes,
point of an expression of a whole other story that began somewhere else and might even begun in a behavioral context, you know.
Right.
So
I mean, we often discover what are the beliefs and stories underneath the way it's being expressed. I mean, I think that's something that, you know, it's one of these things where I didn't necessarily get into this line of work. This work is not a line. It's a confluence, but in order to work with people's beliefs necessarily, but that is what comes up, because if you have a rule internally about what's allowed, what's not allowed, what is true, what's not true, all that sort of stuff, as you say, the biology follows that, and you go, well, of course your toe is doing X because that's the only option that you've made available to it. And so this makes perfect sense. It's like, there's never anything wrong, right? It's always like, how is this perfect for how it's feeding back and feeding forward through the system? And that's it's a very kind and more honest way of regarding each other and regarding what's happening, is like, there's nothing wrong here. We're just getting information, and we're seeing what's relevant that maybe we didn't know was relevant, or
Yeah.
we're seeing what can be shifted that we didn't know could be shifted.
Yeah. And it is a cultural thing. Pain is something's wrong and we've got to switch it off.
Yeah, stop the pain rather than the,
you know, it's like, no, this is, getting a cold or things, having the symptoms of flu. That's a detox, right? Your body is detoxing itself, and we want to switch that off. It's so this whole indoctrination that we've had around things that are so-called wrong in the body. It's like, no, they're telling the truth.
they're telling the truth.
You're not, you're answering the wrong question.
Yeah.
Ask better questions.
Yeah.
Your body will get into balance when you ask better questions and respond to those, and don't answer the things that you think it's telling you. That's pain, it needs to be switched off with some kind of pill or something. That's not answering the question.
Yeah.
So that again is the programming and just that languaging. I mean, one of the things, if I'm working, particularly with, artists who are injured and it's affecting their ability to work, you often hear this blame language around the problem area. And I'm very careful when I'm listening to how people describe their
absolutely
situation. And they say, well, I've got this shoulder. Well, it's because of this shoulder. I'm like, is that not your shoulder? This shoulder?
Right. Absolutely. Yes. The voice, it's like, whoa.
That's a disembodiment.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been shown in research around people who've had either traumatic brain injury or stroke, some sort of brain injury, where there's a particular condition that can arise. It's pretty rare, but it can arise where the person dissociates from a body part. So the connection to that body part has been severed by the injury. And, the person will be completely lucid in every other way, but will be lying in their hospital bed saying, there's this alien arm in the bed. I don't know whose this is. Why is this here? And there's this complete dissociation from it. And what's shown in people that have this condition is that blood flow is reduced to that limb and it starts to die. It starts to wither and atrophy. So, and it's still connected, there's still blood vessels, there's nothing physically.
But that's the biology following the story.
Exactly.
It's perfect.
So for me, that's the same as when people start going, well, it's this shoulder. I'm like, these studies haven't been done, but I'd love to see it done. There reduced blood flow and nutritional supply to an area of the body when you dissociate from it like that, and then start attacking it with blame language. And if you've got an inflamed body part and you start attacking it with blame, you're the reason I can't do this gig and I'm going to lose my
it's my bad shoulder. Then
you are creating, it will defend against that emotionally, like we all do when we go into an inflammatory response. So you actually,
and there's constriction and
the healing. So a lot of the time my work involves mediating between people and their body part. I literally feel like, okay, could we turn around and face each other and just have a conversation?
Yes.
Hands on with people. I'm like, why is this hip not talking to this shoulder? It's like they both got their backs to each other with their arms. Well, I don't know. Well, she's not doing that.
Yes.
Could you just turn around? So I often work on two different body areas simultaneously.
Yes, you do.
You have a little conversation with each other and recognize, we could actually help each other out here.
And this is the whole thing, right? Is that everything is relational, everything is contextual, everything is the interconnected, the interrelatedness. And so the idea that you're going to work with one part is like, well, that might be what you're touching right now, but you're never only working with one part.
No.
Right?
No.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So this would probably be a good place to pause for our first foray together in this forum. I do want to highlight one thing, which is something that emerged to me from this conversation, which is the idea that you can trust yourself.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to just maybe take us out. For me, what that means is, even if I don't prefer what I'm learning or hearing, or maybe I haven't organized it the way I want it yet, whether it's doing a vocal phrase, I haven't quite gotten it precise or something like that, that my desire for something specific is not wrong. And that it's not that I can't trust my body to do what I want it to do. That when we start with that trust, that love, that fullness, that everything becomes possible. So that's what I would say about it, that I have felt from a very young age, because I started performing before I started studying, right? Yeah. So I had a little bit of a different way of coming into it, that I can trust my audience. Like there is a wheel of trust going on, and I can trust myself and they can trust me. And it's this co-creation. And then a lot of times when we get into arts training, we start to, as we talked about earlier, defer, like, well, was that right? And you're sort of outsourcing that sense of self to someone who doesn't know, because they're not you. And we do that for a number of reasons. It's not wrong, but again, it's disempowering, and it's reducing artists a lot of times to some form of victimhood. Yes. And that, the scientific technical term, is hell on your body. It's extreme, you know, as you say, like sort of disassociating or disowning a body part that's not behaving perfectly, but in a way that you've decided is not, you know, what you want.
Inconvenient.
Inconvenient, yeah. You know, it's sort of like the little kid who falls and skins their knee or something, and you're like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, I think it's obvious what's wrong. I need a moment of care, you know, there's nothing, it's just the way it is. So I would love to just maybe take us out of this particular part of the Dynami-Logues on the importance of trusting yourself. What have you got to say about such things?
Yeah, I mean, it is everything, you know, and it's, you know, I feel, you know, you can look at this on an individual level, you can look at it in the context of arts training and how we're driven to not be in trust, that we have to outsource to things around, that we're always disempowered and under the control of the director who hires us, or that, you know, but there's also a, you know, fractals again, there's also a collective cultural level of that, and this kind of deference to authority. And, you know, if you want to get really esoteric with it, you know, right now we're moving from the Piscean age into the Aquarian age, and Piscean age was all about the collective. You are a drone in the system, whereas Aquarius is individuation, coming into your individual empowerment.
Yes.
And then learning collaboration. So it is still about collective working, but as an individual, and being honored as an individual. But if you
not disappearing into the system.
Yeah. And if you wish to be honored as an individual, which I would, you know, guess that most people on the planet really want that, and that the biology is striving towards that, and we're like, well, I'm not getting that in the world around me. I'm feeling like I'm being controlled by all these forces around me. It starts here. And this is the thing you have control over.
Yes.
You
can honor your experience. You can listen. And it really, as you say, it does fractal out. When we get clear.
You cannot do it the other way around. And that's the issue. That most people change the outside before they've changed the inside. And that's a lot harder as well, because there's a lot more moving parts to that.
Right.
When you absolutely you know, I work with some people who work on climate and you know, sustainability and all these things, but they live in depletion in themselves. I'm like, how do you think you're going to go out and solve the water crisis when you can't manage the water? You don't understand the water in your own body. You go out into nature like that, and nature's going to laugh at you and go, seriously? You're going to tell me about
you're going to manage all this.
So that's an energetic thing. So when you learn to do it, and again, we get a lot of conditioning that's selfish. We're paying attention. I need to be helping the world and saving it. This martyr syndrome, that's gone now. We cannot do the healing martyr anymore. Trust me, I've been there.
And I think there's a real agenda with that I want to just recognize that, like, someone's benefiting from us not being in touch with ourselves. That's not an accident. You didn't make that up as some weird, you know, behavioral strangeness. It's like, there's a reason, it's really interesting because I was chatting with someone who had some very weird ideas about feminism and patriarchy, and I was sort of like, I don't know that we can do business if you're sort of like, I don't believe in the patriarchy. Like, I think there are these forces at work, as you say, they've been at work for a very long time. We didn't end up here accidentally. I'm not, finding my truth. That sounds very, here's my truth, but finding, like, validating my own experience is not something I'm doing more and more now because I just, didn't think of it earlier. It's like, no, we're indoctrinated to not do that.
Yes.
Right.
And again,
it makes us powerful.
Yeah. And it's not to come to that with judgment,
Right.
It's just the lesson that humanity had to go through. Again, that was the exam paper we were set for that age. And now we're shifting into it's a new exam paper. So we're getting a new clinical example of how to understand and be and interact and learn. So we've learned a lot from that model, but thank you very much. We're done with it now. Now we're going to find a different way. So the more we yell at things, the more we give them power energetically in the kind of, in
Totally.
the specific sense. So, I would say don't give life support to something you don't agree with because by yelling at it, you're
investing in it. Yeah.
You have to have accepted something to reject it.
Yeah.
So just be what you want to be. Do what you want to do. Be in the truth that you want to see in the world. Be the change, right? That has some basis in biology. If you are honoring that in your own physical, it will fractalize out around you, and suddenly you'll find that thing's going on over there, but it's nothing to do with your reality because you're creating and drawing to you the things that serve the energy. Again, it's just the frequency. We're all resonating at different frequencies and everyone is valid. You don't say that, on the piano that, well, that's a bad note and this is a good note. All notes are required to make music.
Yes.
So, but you're going to pick a little bandwidth that you want to work within and do that, and don't yell at anybody else for doing what they're doing. That's just none of your business.
Right. And this is where the it seems miraculous. It seems like the world shapeshifts once we show up to measure that electron. Once I make the decision, once I take the step, it's like, whoa. And it really is. It's like, well, that's the fractaling out, is everything is constantly reorganizing anyway.
Yes.
And so again, it's that being in vulnerability, being in a stable flux, a reliable dynamism.
Yes.
That makes everything possible. And we can, that is very stable. It is trustworthy. And that when we come home to ourselves and our own experience, that's when those fractals start to go in a direction that usually ends up being much more in alignment, in harmony, biologically, physically, vocally, energetically, all the things.
And you get the feedback from the universe to go, yeah, you're doing it right. And it's something that the two of us have experienced. I'm experiencing it right now. Oh, it's something I've known and been told. Oh yes, if you do it from the inside, it will be reflected back to you. Like, oh yeah, that sounds like
right.
That's a miracle when it works.
It works.
When you trust it, you gain agency from the fact that it just gets reflected back to you.
Yes. Yes. And that's the trust, I think, is the part that feels the most wobbly to a lot of us who have been in this paradigm of, I need to make it happen. It's like I'm generating everything, as opposed to I'm tapped into the field by being it, right? If you think of like a spider web, it's not Tinker Toys that are stuck, it's like, it's a whole system. And when you know that you are the system, you are part of the system, then it doesn't make sense to isolate yourself and then generate and work hard. It's like, I get to open to what is here.
Yeah, and we are all responsible for what we put into the field. And if you're constantly yelling at things because you don't like them, and belittling people or whatever you're doing, it's like, don't pee in your drinking water. We're all be careful what you're putting out into the field, because we want to keep it clean, right? So energetically, I have a response. So that takes it away, because a lot of people get this sense of, oh, well, it's selfish, I'm spending all this time on me. No, by doing that,
that's your part of the collective.
Everyone else, because you're cleaning up the field. So we can, and just being, in a resonant sort of state, then people around you, they're like, oh, I just like being around you, and then they're attuning to you. But when so it is an act of generosity to take care of yourself, and it's an act of arrogance not to take care of yourself. So that's another flip.
Agreed. Okay, so we're going to leave y'all with that. I think that's a beautiful place to dismount for the time being. Thank you so much for talking with me, Jennie. And
goodness, likewise, it's always a joy.
It's always a joy. And it, as y'all can tell, we sort of ramble around and pivot, and again, all things are possible in this conversation because it's all present at all times. So if you're going, well, where was the through line? This is what it's like, and it's all part of it. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for spending some time talking with us.
Any things that you want, like, I'd love to hear you guys talk about this.
Oh, yes, absolutely. If there's anything specific, if there's anything, right? Oh my gosh, we would love that. Yes, just more things to play with. So thank you again, Jennie. I adore you.
See you soon.
And we'll see you in the next one, everyone.